if I do not exercise my privilege and do something else with my life, but regress back to the way they were and the life they grew up with and their mindset, then that also does a disservice to all their sacrifice.
Joy isn't a privilege. It's actually a birthright. That is your natural state of being. It's just that it gets lost in translation.
How do you make sure women, especially when they experience certain life events, like I think being a mom is one of the big ones, how do you kind of ensure that we create structures and supports at an institutional level that they don't drop off, and how do they continue, not feeling like they've been forced to make a choice, but actually truly make whatever choice feels authentic and right to them?
What's the point in sort of making life difficult for yourself? Why can't you just relax and be content and be happy with what you have? Why do you have to always look for more? And who almost believes that the word ambition after the age of 35 or 40 is kind of a toxic word. Seema, we're back with another episode, and I keep thinking to myself just how amazing of a time it is to be alive. I was in another city recently, and I was having dinner with someone, and during dinner they mentioned that the night before they had dinner with the president of the United States. And then I was thinking to myself that, wow, and this person's now having dinner with me. It's just such an amazing time because we have a guest here that I connected with through Threads, social media again, and without social media or without Threads, our Instagram, Seema, you and I would have never met. Our guests would have never met. So it's just such an amazing time to be able to connect with so many people. What do you think?
I could not agree more. And, it's interesting because on the flip side, social media, not to get too off topic, but for those of you who are listening and you're like, I just can't bring myself to do it. That connection can happen anytime, anywhere. It can happen in a coffee shop, right? It can happen when you're sitting on the airplane and you're waiting to take off. It can happen at the grocery store. But what I love about our conversations is it's not so much the social media, but the genuine connection that happens, but only because we're willing to open our eyes, slow down, and show ourselves to somebody else with a little bit of authenticity and a little bit of vulnerability. And that's what I think makes it so magical.
Absolutely. And like anything else, money, alcohol, French fries, anything, your phone, social media is a tool. It's how you use it is going to determine your experience. And my experience on Threads led me to Rashi, who's here. She is a former management consultant. She now leads a learning and development function at one of the most impressive organizations on the planet. It is a well-known management consulting company. For obvious legal purposes, we won't mention the name at all, but trust me when I say that we spent a lot of time vetting and curating the guests, and today's episode is going to be absolutely brilliant. Welcome to the show, Rashi.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, I was just smiling because I'm like, some good came out of social media, right? Mostly people just sort of give it a bad rep, but like, look, you and me are chatting and I met Seema through you. So excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really just, I think of social media as you can stay in your little village, right? Or you can venture out of your village. And the way to do that is by using social media to put little billboards up on the side of the road. And as people are passing on the highway between villages, they might see your shop or your wares or who you are, and get interested in you. And as your circle grows, your influence grows, your ability to make an impact grows, your wealth grows because you have more opportunities. And not only that, but the people in your life benefit from it because you're able to create opportunities and connections for them as well. So welcome to the show. We're excited to chat with you. Before we get started, though, I'm sure people are going to Google you. They're going to find all this wonderful stuff you've done. Tell us something about you that really gets to know the real Rashi Kakkar, the one that we can't figure out through Google.
Well, I guess the stuff that is not Googleable, I guess, and you can't find, through the curated sort of LinkedIn profile, etc., would be. So I'm the eldest daughter on my mom's side, and I say that because just being the oldest daughter, I think usually comes with this whole pressure of being a role model and always sort of aiming for perfection and being held to a certain high standard. I consider myself a failed tennis player till I was 16, 17. If you would have met me and you would ask me what is it that I want to do with my life, I would say I just want to play tennis professionally. But that did not happen, and so I consider myself a failed a tennis player. And then the other thing that I did briefly, and this is very, very brief, during my university days. So this was back in India. There was a channel called Channel V. So Channel V is like, it was the MTV sort of India. I was a VJ for a bit, for about
Oh,
five,
wow.
6 months. Yeah, I used to come on this show called Campus Blog. And at that time, it was pretty cool. I would walk around campus. I had like a camera crew, and, I would go talk to students, a lot like a podcast, except there was no TikTok at that time, right? But like street interviews and stuff, and then count down to like top songs and throw it to the other sort of campus VJs. So that was for a brief period of time in a very, very small community in India. I would say I was slightly famous. So that was kind of fun for that little time in my life. So those are maybe 2, 3 things that if you look on Google, you will probably not know about me.
Wow. So you're an OG content creator.
Well, I guess. I know at that time there was no word called influencer, but someone said I was a micro influencer. And I was like, what does a micro influencer mean? So they said, you're simultaneously very famous in a small circle and completely unknown. So I think that's the word I go for, that maybe before, the word was invented, I was a micro influencer.
That's
Yeah.
me. I'm famous in my house and nowhere else.
I hear you. It's the same with me. It's probably a little bit of this neighborhood, and, a couple of people on Threads know us.
I love it.
That's really cool. When you say that, I think back to my own college days, and I was so focused on getting to the end goal. Like if you would have said fun, I would have looked at you like you had two heads. Like, I don't have time for that. I'm going to get into dental school. That's my ultimate goal. I've got to finish this. I've got to, and I think that I'm really glad that I have since evolved past that. But I love when I hear about people who kind of have figured it out before I did, because it's such an important lens to have, like that idea of like, I'm in college and I want to have fun and try something else that most of our parents would be like, huh, what are you doing? Like, how is that helpful? And I love that you sounds like you had a lot of fun.
I did. And I think that was also because, again, growing up, in India, there was this whole sense of like, college is the last time you can have fun in life, and then life gets serious. And I was like, I don't know what to make of this, but I may as well just have a good time in life, right? And so I think I was just playing tennis. I was like going out on trips with my friends. I was part of a bunch of college university things. And, life turned out fine. I still ended up college doing fine. I wasn't maybe, 4.0 GPA, but I was close enough to land in decent places. And so, I'm glad I sort of listened to that whole idea of this is the last time in life you have fun, and life just gets serious after this. So it was a good few years.
Yeah.
Love it. So tell us, what do you do? Learning and development might be a term that some of us are not familiar with. Before researching you for this podcast, it wasn't something that I was too familiar with. So what do you do, and what are you passionate about? And what do you think someone who invests an hour into spending time with us on this conversation is going to walk away with after the end of the episode?
Yeah, so I guess learning and development generally as a function, exists in a lot of sort of corporations and firms. And think of us as the people who are our entire focus is on helping sort of unlock human capability, lead to like growth, right? And like help the people that work in this organization kind of keep upping their skills and capabilities, right? And the capabilities and skills could be very specific to expertise or whatever they're doing in their day job. Like it could be very domain or functional specific, or it could be things like leadership, things like, how do you get better at communication? How do you move? If for the first time you're moving from being an individual contributor into a manager, right? How do you develop those people skills, etc.? So to be honest, like this was, Dinesh, a function I stumbled into only a year and a half back. I started my career very sort of marketing and sales focused, moved into doing a lot of like product management, UX, CX work. And at some time through all that, I sat down in a lot of these large transformations going on in like $1 billion plus organizations. And I realized technology and processes are very easy to sort of solve once you put some horsepower behind them. but the people side of the things was always messy, complicated. And if that wasn't tackled, that is where everything would fail, right? And so through that, I got exposure to a lot of people in organizations, heading their talent management teams, their being chief people officers, etc. And that's where I realized that there's a bespoke kind of group of people who are tasked with this idea of upskilling and growing human capabilities. And I'm just someone who, is just very, very optimistic in life. I've had sort of my own sort of life stories. My mom had a pretty rough pregnancy with me, to the point that through the pregnancy, multiple times there was a chance of just losing me, right? So I also consider the fact that I'm alive as this lucky thing that happened in my life. And from there, there was a time when at age 6 or 7, back in a busy market in New Delhi, I'd got lost. And I came home after 5-6 hours, completely unheard of, right? The police,
Wow.
everybody was shocked, because the little girl gets lost and comes home. And this person actually dropped me back home, random stranger. It's another interesting story, but I think stuff like that just always made me see the good in people, and this idea of as humans, we can keep growing and developing. And so once I learned of this function that, I can spend my entire day job sort of focused on what makes people grow, what makes humans learn, how do you keep developing capability in people, especially now with all this narrative around AI kind of taking over. I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. And so I given that I've had a bit of a squiggly career, I approach this problem slightly differently than people, who've kind of grown up in the world of psychology or adult development or
Interesting.
education. So I don't know if someone post this 1 hour conversation will take insights that are directly applicable to them as humans, but that's what I'd hope to do, right? Is just talk
Yeah.
about how we can sort of unlock all this potential that's sitting within each one of us.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting answer, and it leads me to another question. And I'd like you to answer this question as if you were speaking directly to a single person, and
Mhm.
look straight down the barrel of the camera. And what do you say to the person? Because I think Seema and I and a lot of us who are out on social media are, sort of growth mindset. We're willing to get curious about what's possible, right? And that inherently comes with a fair amount of hustle, a fair amount of discomfort, a fair amount of putting yourself out there repeatedly and failing and trying again and doing different things,
Uh-huh.
right? Otherwise, you're not learning if you know you'll be successful or crush it at everything you do. So what do you say to the person directly who's like, why are you guys doing this? I've done what I wanted to do. I'm making good money. My family's happy. Um, what's the point in sort of making life difficult for yourself? Why can't you just relax and be content and be happy with what you have? Why do you have to always look for more and more and more? And who almost believes that the word ambition
Mhm.
after the age of 35 or 40 is kind of a toxic word, right? Like, if you think about someone who's 65, and they're like, you know what? I'm 65. I'm ambitious. I want to see what I can do. People would look and be like, what's wrong with you? You're almost at retirement. Why are you still ambitious? Ambition should be reserved for a college kid. But in your 40s, you should start, relaxing, taking it easy, spending time, just enjoying what you've built. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, so I think my fundamental belief is that everything that's living, right, literally from an atom to an amoeba, is constantly in a state of motion, right? And if there is stagnation, it leads to decay, right? If you put water down and just let it sit in one place, it's going to just become rancid. It just becomes dirty, right? But if there is movement, if there's a river, if there's flow, it's sort of always growing, right? And so this is my fundamental belief. And yes, I completely agree with you that there's hustle porn and toxic productivity, and that's maybe to an extreme. But I think if as humans at some point we tell ourselves we've arrived and there's nothing to learn, nothing to grow, I'd actually say muscles start getting weaker, and you start kind of decaying. And I think it might sound extreme to say this, but I genuinely feel if you ever get into this mindset that there is nothing more for me to learn, nothing more for me to experience, nothing more for me to grow into, that's the day you start dying a little bit, almost, right? Because you stop becoming relevant, not to the world, but even to yourself, right? I think the joy of being alive is this idea that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. And for me, it's you can 0.1% like do things, right? Like your brain cells. And again, by no means am I a doctor or a neuroscientist, but I know that your neurons keep powering every time you're exercising that muscle and learning something new, right? And so that's what my advice to this human would be, that if you really do believe in that, I would really push and ask you, are you really living, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just completed a really rigorous 6 months of like a training.
Mhm.
And it was so interesting because we actually just finished on Thursday and we were all there. There's like 50 of us in the room. And one of the people in the room, I don't know how old they were, but I mean, really on the end of, I would guess he would be retired, right? He's still working. But it was interesting because his reflection was, when I told my wife I wanted to do this, and it was this is the time and this is the expectation if you sign up and whatever, the wife's response was, "You're too old." And to watch him sort of share that and then move through his decision to go ahead and go through it, and watch him really light up. I mean, and to watch him sort of shed these old beliefs of like, I'm too old, this is how I've always done things. And really, it was almost youthful, right? By
Mhm.
the time we were done, to watch his face and even how he was moving, it was a little bit easier, like a little bit more youthful. And so I love what you said about continuing to push. We either grow or we die. And I think that that's something that we either adopt or we realize, and then it feels like it's even harder, and then we tell ourselves, oh, it's too hard, and then we get stuck again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I believe, I'm glad you said that. You said it in a really eloquent way. I'm actually going to steal your analogy of water, because that makes a lot of sense for me and for a lot of people. But I also believe that you're either growing or you're shrinking.
Mhm.
There is no plateau, there's no stasis. And the very essence of joy is not in having joy or not in having happiness, but in the ability to pursue it, right?
Hmm.
In fact, it's in our constitution, the pursuit of happiness, right? And so I think that if you ever feel like you've attained happiness or you've attained joy or contentment, that's maybe when you're in risk of going backwards a little bit and getting stuck and starting to feel like you're in a rut and feeling like, is this all there is for me? Right?
Completely agreed, right? And I think a lot of people confuse that happiness is not the absence of discomfort, right? Like I
Right.
think
Yeah.
the most happiest moments that I've experienced in life have come after discomfort, right? Like I'm a mom. Literally, like me seeing my child meant that there was physical discomfort of labor, right? Like the act of birth itself was like, oh my God, it was I women do it, but it's rough. It's a lot of discomfort that leads to joy, right? So I think that's the other thing, that just being in the state of like I have arrived will keep me happy, I think is false, right? Like the only way, like you said, the state of happiness to find it is to constantly like go through those cycles of discomfort and discover something new about yourself or the world.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a quick follow-up question. Is there a difference in growth and pursuit in areas that are meaningful
Hmm.
within or without us? And I'll give you an example. Or is growth or pursuit of, refining of skills or accumulation or addition of skills in any area sort of equivalent? And I'll give you an example. So, should someone who is content in their professional life um, sort of focus on their golf game or gardening or whatever else? Or do we need to do something that gives us a sense of achievement or accolades from sort of a typical traditional measure of success?
Yeah, the way I think about it, and I think the joy of sort of being a human with autonomy is that we all get to define whatever's meaningful to us. So I'd say it depends on really what drives meaning to you. I mean,
Right.
personally, I think chasing external validation after a certain point is not helpful because there's no sort of end to it. And so, if you're someone who wants to really get good at your golf game, you want to get like your scratch handicap, right? And if that's what gives you joy in the pursuit of that, I think go for it, right? I as I've gotten sort of older, like one of the things I've realized is, when I was younger, people would be like, find something you do professionally that kind of is what gives you joy, and then you don't work a day in your life and all that stuff. And I think that's all well and good. And I did a bit of sports management, and so I know why that's not true.
Hmm.
I actually think your source of income and your source of passion need not be the same thing, right?
Hmm.
And so in your example, I guess, Dinesh, it's if I am someone who feels, what gives me meaning is, leading this organization, or you've got your own practice and you want to develop that, or you're an entrepreneur, you've got your own sort of coaching business. And if pursuing that is where meaning lies for you, go for it. But if you're someone who's like, hey, professionally, I'm at a good place, but what really gives me joy is, pursuing ultra marathons around the world, or it could be something small too, right? Like creating art. And if that's what gives you meaning, I think go for it, right? And I think the beauty of just being adults with agency and autonomy is that we all get to sort of define our own adventure and what gives us meaning.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It is interesting because what I heard you say was that your source of purpose, and to me that translates to your source of joy. While it doesn't have to be sourced from your profession, that it can still enhance how you show up, right? How you do one thing is how you do anything.
Exactly.
And so just by, maybe you don't love your job, maybe you don't love your career, but if you have some part of life that really, really gives you a deep sense of purpose or direction or joy, that inherently makes the other parts of life that much sweeter.
Bang on, yes.
Yeah.
And so, which brings me to, there are really tension points when we bring these sorts of topics up: happiness versus joy, ambition, passion, being in the moment and enjoying it versus pursuit of happiness. There's all this nuance that we've brought up, right?
Mm.
But for South Asians, there's a whole different layer, right?
Yes.
Because now we're navigating culture, what a specific relationship might look like or mean as being acceptable, versus what might feel good or authentic to you is also coming into play, right? So how, as South Asian professionals, how do we really bring all of that home?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It's hard, and I'll be honest. I'm on a journey myself. I don't want to make this sound like I've attained some sort of like enlightenment, but I think for me the really hard unlock to do and coach myself was disconnecting the sense of success and achievement. Right, for the longest time in my life, I sort of grew up with this idea that every sort of achievement, right, going to a certain sort of university, getting a job in a certain place, getting a promotion every couple of years, was the way I was successful, and therefore I was happy, right? I think,
Mhm.
and I don't want to, again, say the whole culture sort of does this, but there is something about being South Asian and growing up in this very sort of achievement oriented culture. Like I said, I was the oldest daughter. And so this added pressure of just being perfect and being a role model and not slipping also meant that somewhere I had confused happiness, joy, success to be how much accolades I was getting, and how others viewed what I was doing with my life, right? And so a lot of it was just, I mean, I haven't had the most traditional career, but in the career I still chose to have, it was still like you've got to kind of aspire for the best. That's something my parents, like from a very young age, just ingrained in me, that we don't care what you do. If you want to be a hairdresser, we want you to be the best hairdresser in the world, right? And so
Yeah.
for me, I think, and generally a lot of other South Asians that I've met, we sort of grew up in a very achievement oriented culture. And this whole idea of, that happiness arrives after you reach a certain destination.
Hmm.
And as I was telling you, right, Seema, I was told like, oh, have fun in college, then life gets serious. And then I realized it's like, get your first job, then, then you can be happy.
Mhm.
Okay, get, your first promotion. Oh no, have your, get married to the right person. Or buy your first house. No, have a kid. No, your kid now needs to go to a certain kind of university. And it's always like we keep pushing
Yeah.
joy to a certain destination, which I have realized is this shifting goalpost, and it just never arrives, right? And so at some point in my life, I said, you know what? No, um, I do not want to be the person who is waiting for a certain like mythical time in my life to come and a certain
Mhm.
destination to start doing things that make me happy and make me fulfilled. But it was a struggle, and it's still like an internal dialogue I have with myself. And there are still times when I regress back and start getting into these like not helpful comparison games, right? Of like, I am at this age. Am I on the right kind of track in terms of net worth? Am I on the right track in terms of titles when it comes to like other people I went to university with and everybody else in the world, right? And so um, I don't know if it's a direct answer to your question, but I mean, I did work with a coach, which also, by the way, in the South Asian community, people thought I was crazy. They were like, why are you
Yeah.
working with a
Oh
coach? Right?
gosh, don't even get me going down
And,
that
and,
road.
and, they, and a lot of people don't even understand like what a coach is. They're like, are you depressed? I was like, I'm not depressed. I'm very happy in life. They're like, then what is this coach? Just go talk to your parents. I was like, sure, but my parents lived a different reality, a different lived experience at a different time. And so people also thought the fact that I was, paying someone to talk to me once every couple of weeks about questions like this, they thought I was loopy again in the community. And so I think just exploring all that and really doing a lot of work and still doing a lot of work is helping me, move
Yeah.
in that direction away from uh, life is equal to the way I'll be defined in the world is equal to, externally what I achieve and do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a friend who coins it your personal reality box, which is what, you sort of said as well. And I think it's so interesting. The moment you start to do something different than what other people expect you, like they've all made a narrative, a story about you, right? Like you are my daughter, and therefore this is the type of relationship that we have. But the moment you start to shift how you relate to me, now the ego does what the ego does. It's not personal. I'm not trying to, find fault with anybody because we all do this as humans, but our immediate reaction is the ego kicks in. And then you're like,
Uh-huh.
well, if you're different, then does that mean that I was wrong? Does that mean that I'm not doing something? Am I missing something? And we tend to make it all about ourselves. And so this idea of really investing effort and energy into kicking the tires, really pushing the envelope at the periphery of what we consider our reality box, the things we think we know, how we know them. It's really, really gold when you start doing it.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, I love everything you said, Rashi. I mean, I was excited for this conversation, and I'm getting more excited as we continue to talk because I'm realizing just how similar we are, right?
Uh-huh.
And, a lot of what we're talking about is sort of the reasons why some people might be held back or what, the information of the what is going on, the mechanism. But we're ultimately interested in unlocking human potential.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of objections to the types of things we're saying that people might feel. And one of the things I believe is, when people say that I'm doing my best, right?
Mhm.
Like I did my best, I'm trying my hardest. I have come to realize that what we think is our best is vastly different than our actual best. So I'd even venture to say 9.9 or 10 out of 10 times when someone says, I'm doing my best, I've tried my best, this is the best I can do, or I've tried my hardest, we're probably only talking that they did 2 out of 10 of what they're capable of. Because
Mhm.
I myself am realizing that what I thought I was capable of is a fraction of what I'm really capable of when push comes to shove. When you actually have to do something and you make up your mind to do it and you silence the excuses and you say, okay, I'm going to give it a try. Let's see how far I can go before this thing kind of fizzles out and I actually fail. You find out you can go much further. But what would you say to the person who's listening to this, or maybe their spouse sends this to them or a friend sends it to them, and say, you know what? That's cute, guys. I like it. You
Mhm.
guys have a lot of privilege. You have stable careers. You've got supportive spouses. You don't have a family health emergency. You haven't lost your job. It's cute that you have an hour or two every couple of weeks to talk to a coach, to pay someone to talk to you. I've got work to do, and I am struggling to put food on the table, and I don't have the luxury of the time to even stop and eat at my
Mhm.
table. I have to eat in the car. Otherwise, we'll, insert blank of what happened. And the reason I ask this is because this is kind of what our parents lived through a little bit, right? They were new immigrants to the country. They were dealing with a new language, a new environment. And not all of us feel or think that we have the ability to focus on some of these things, joy, for example, and we still feel that, there's a bit of a scarcity in our mind. How do you unlock that person's potential by showing them, or what would you say to them to help them believe that the perceived scarcity or lack of ability to do
Mm.
this is really just a subjective perception, not an objective truth?
Yeah. So first of all, whoa, what a question. But there
I know
is
it's kind of long, right?
no, but it is also one of those questions which, I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think right off the bat, right, I think I recognize my privilege, right? I'm sure we all recognize our privilege, right? So there is a little bit of yes. Sometimes when you feel very safe and secure in a lot of things is when you can be a little risky in some part of your life. So, I do not want to minimize the struggle that some people have where they truly are kind of struggling for survival and putting food on the table. And, you just have to do what you have to do. All that I would say is that, look, like, irrespective of where you are and what you're doing in life, I think each one of us, that there's something we deeply care about, right? It's you don't have to pursue excellence, or to your point, like constant growth in every aspect of your life, but you've got to kind of look at your life, step back and say, look, if this is my reality, if this is my life, if this is the things I have to do, like, what is something that I care about, right? And maybe for this person, like you said, who's a new immigrant, maybe it is about just setting up their family for success, and that's their source of motivation and joy, right? And their purpose, right? And then taking that as a sort of your North Star. What is it in your life that you can do, right? Is it that can you upskill somewhere? Is it that you can, acquire some other sort of capabilities or skills? Is it that you can do other things to just take care of yourself physically, right? To be the best version of yourself. A lot of times it also means, am I taking out the time to nurture myself? I would say, again, as with most things in life, some people do have the privilege of getting the time, the space to do this consistently, and a lot of people maybe are struggling with it. But if you are on that other end of the spectrum where you are in survival mode, uh, it's just hard in that mode to kind of step back and introspect. But I would say even there, can you create some sort of space time for yourself, um, to just step back and think about, what is it in life that drives me? Where do I get my source of meaning and purpose from? And then sort of pursue that, right? I think, so that's one. The other thing that I've also realized is that, a lot of times when people come from households where, their parents sort of sacrifice for themselves. In my case, my parents are still back in India. So I am the immigrant to North America. But my family sort of was, they dealt with the partition and things like that. Um, um, I've also realized that, just because their reality was a certain way, mine, and they worked hard to not make sure that's my reality. If I do not exercise my privilege and do something else with my life, but regress back to the way they were and the life they grew up with and their mindset, then that also does a disservice to all their sacrifices, right? In a way. So I think that's the other thing I tell a lot of my friends who I know here are like second, third generation immigrants, that, you don't have to feel guilty, right? Like at a certain point, yes, that was your parents' reality. And yes, they sacrificed a lot for you to be here, but your entire life cannot be in the pursuit of doing things that make you miserable only because you've got this like guilt that my parents did something, right? And so that's the other thing where I say that, some of us do have privilege, and if we don't exercise that privilege and make ourselves better and the world better, then I think all the sacrifices that everybody in our bloodline did before us to get us to this point was a complete waste.
I,
Hmm.
that's so beautifully said, because guilt is something that many cultures leverage to
Yeah.
keep the status quo the status
Yes.
quo. Um, so I really love that you said it in that way. And as you were speaking, what occurred to me actually was joy isn't a privilege. It's actually a birthright. That is your innate sense
Yes.
of who, that's your natural state of being. It's just that it gets lost in translation, right? Kids
Mhm.
are joyful by
Yes.
default, and then
Most.
things change. I mean, okay, yes, it's general. We're gonna, but generally speaking. And so there's a lot that I would love to kind of go into, because Rashi, you're just such a goldmine of insight and wisdom and practicality. Um, and I also know that there's a whole section of genius that we haven't even tapped into yet. And so I want to shift the conversation a little bit. Talk to us about decks and diapers. What, I'm thinking slide decks and diapers, and they don't really go together unless you maybe are running like a diaper company. But obviously that's not what you're talking about. And so I want to explore that a little bit. Is that cool?
That is completely cool. And I can give you the origin story and exactly how the name came up. But you're right. It doesn't go together in my brain. It was like the two realities I thought I'm going to start living. So decks really are PowerPoint presentations. We call them decks. And, as Dinesh mentioned, I am a management consultant. I've sort of worked in the corporate world all my life, and we sort of live and breathe decks. And so the diapers bit sort of came when I became a mom for the first time. And as life sometimes throws random curveballs at you. I gave birth to my daughter 5 days before they formally called it a pandemic. So my daughter's March 2020 born.
Wow.
And that's the first child like me and my husband had together. We obviously had no idea what the hell we were doing. We thought we'd get a lot of help.
Wait, your baby didn't come with an instruction manual?
No, I was very disappointed. She came up and I'm like, now what do we do? And they're like, you go home with this baby. And I was like, there was a lot more rigor to me getting my driver's license than you just telling me to take
just have a baby and take it home.
Child home. And then, 5 days later, you shut the world down and say it's a pandemic. And so, I think a lot of women who have children, especially for the first time, postpartum depression is real. I think the intensity, I was not ideal. I like it, the intensity of motherhood, I don't think I was prepared for. And to do it, in complete isolation, like literally being cut off from the world, where just there was no help, right? We could get no in, was also really, really hard. So we sort of did the first couple of months, sort of survived. And then I remember one night just feeling like really alone. And we had our daughter also slightly earlier than most of our friends did in our community. And so none of my friends really knew what I was going through. I had no cousins. All of them are younger than I am. They had no idea. My mom obviously did this decades back. And so her idea of, motherhood was a bit skewed. She'd forgotten the intensity, I guess, of the early days. And I remember in the middle of the night just changing my daughter's diapers and being like, is this life now? At some point my maternity leave gets over. I am someone who's enjoyed what I've done professionally. My husband likes what he does professionally. We wanted to be a dual income career household. And as I started sort of reading about motherhood and how to be a better mother, the kind of stuff I would read would make it seem like that's all you do, right? Like your entire life is now, you wake up and you go kind of grow grains and then you bring them home and kind of, I guess, make bread. It just felt all consuming. And as I was thinking about going back to work post maternity leave with this child, I was also reading about, how do you succeed as a professional? What do you do to make this work? And a lot of that advice seemed to sort of exclude the reality that women as mothers face and parents face, right? You have all this time in the world, go do these passion projects, go for conferences, go start your own podcast, etc. And so I was like, this is not my reality. Net, I need to find more people who kind of live this reality of decks and diapers, who are not making this a false trade-off or not making it or, it's and so just on a whim, I literally in the middle of the night, I think sleep deprived, I told my husband, you know what, I've got an idea. I'm going to go start a newsletter. I'm going to call it Decks and Diapers. I'm going to start talking about my experiences and hopefully just find other people who are going through this. And I think through just writing on the internet and that community, I started discovering more and more humans, women and men, who I say sort of navigate this dual ambition of, I want to be successful professionally. I want personal fulfillment. I'm doing it while having kids. I don't think it's an either or. I don't want to completely drop out of the workforce and become a parent 24/7. I don't want to ignore my kids and completely outsource parenting and joy and fulfillment. And so that's, I guess, the sort of origin story of Decks and Diapers. Is I was just isolated in the pandemic. I wanted to find more people who sort of were navigating with this dichotomy of, you can either be a successful parent or a successful professional. And I said there have to be more humans such as me, such as, our family, where both husband, wife, or partners, right? Again, I don't want to make this all about heterosexual sort of couples, but just both the partners want to have their own professional identities, but also want to actually experience parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's, what I love about this, and listeners, you may have missed it, but make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to sit there and go, well, I'm feeling this way, or I have this need, or I have this ambition, I want to do this thing, but insert reason, circumstance, limitation. But the only thing stopping you, Rashi, you just addressed it head on. And you were like, cool, right? Like, I don't have anybody in my family and my friends. And instead of falling to what is honestly easier, which is, I'm in this alone. I've got to figure it out. No one understands me. It's totally cool. I'm sure you actually passed through that section of roadway, if you will, if you imagine life as a journey. And it sounds like you didn't try to bypass it. You went through it. You drove through the loneliness. You drove through the confusion and you are right. It is exhaustion. And there's a moment in time where you're like, this is going to be it forever. You forget that your kid actually does grow, and eventually you won't be changing diapers every 2 hours. And, your boobs won't feel like they're going to explode all the time. Like, it does end, but in the moment it feels like forever.
100%.
And what you did, and I'm like physically lit up because you just said, cool, I'm going to make it happen. How can I do this in a way that's accessible despite the world being shut down, despite me not necessarily knowing the next right thing, despite me A, B, and C? And listeners, this is really why I was excited to bring Rashi onto the show, is because chances are, if you reflect on your own life, maybe there's a little energy that can be turned up a little bit with Rashi's philosophy here. What do you think?
One thing that I also want to add, and my Gen Z cousins use this term a lot. It's called embrace the cringe.
Mm.
A lot of times, the word cringe is thrown around a lot I think it's a way to cut people to size and have them not do anything. To Dinesh's point, a lot of people don't write on the internet or put themselves out there. I bet you guys thought about, oh my God, like some people in our family, friend circles are going to think we're cringy. Initially, it took a little bit of effort where I'm like, if I'm going to start writing this, there will be someone who's going to read this, a random high school classmate, some random cousin, a distant aunt who's going to roll her eyes and be like, why does she think she's so important that her story or her experience needs to be shared? Or who is Rashi to sort of do this, right? But I think unless you sort of embrace that cringe, and I really like that word, that discomfort, that feeling of like some random person somewhere is going to like laugh, you're never going to arrive at that place where you need to be, right? Like, it's funny today now that this newsletter is read by close to like 2,000 odd people around the world. It's now I have people actually pinging me and saying, hey, can we feature our story or like feature this person? But some of them were like non-existent in the beginning, right? I actually went to strangers and I consciously decided to expose myself to strangers because I think it's easy to put yourself out there on the internet to a group of people who never know you than to start by doing it in an immediate circle that knows you. Because that just feels very cringy. Like, it just feels like to be like shamelessly self-promoting yourself, right? So that's, I think, just one thing. If someone wants to kind of be inspired after this, I'd say embrace the cringe. It's going to feel uncomfortable. Just do it. And maybe just start with a group of strangers. It's actually much easier to get acceptance with people who don't know you, your backstory, or who you were like a decade back.
Yeah. No, I think that's all great. I think that's fantastic advice, and look at the benefits that have come from it. But I'm more lately focusing on the how, right?
Mhm.
So I think people know what we just said. I think it's not a new concept. I think people know it, but they don't understand it. I think those are two very different things, right? And I can tell someone something all day long, but I can't understand it from them, right? And so the question that's in my mind is, embrace the cringe. I get that, but and then there's a word vomit of, well, now's not the right time. I don't know what, insert reasons that sound like excuses, right? Because excuses are believed most by the person making them, right? So how do you embrace the cringe? other than sort of, what is some people might dismiss as superficial advice, just do it, just put it out there. Okay, just
Yeah. Yeah.
put what out there, and what is the exact mechanism? Because I think, the first topic we have here is ambition. Ambition craves a roadmap, right? Ambition sort of stifles or feels suffocated when there is no path in front of them
Mhm.
and there is no next rung to climb. And the reality is, much of life, just like parenting, um, you know, dealing with aging parents, or starting a business or starting a career, anything outside of a well-defined career path, or sort of a
Mhm.
job, is just a big muck, and you're sort of swimming around trying to figure out, trying different things, um, that a lot of people who are ambitious shy away from. They
Mhm.
choose the sure thing because they know they can get the dopamine hit from the next achievement and the next achievement. What if we don't know what the next achievement looks like? What if we don't know what the benefit will look like? How do you embrace the cringe? And why should I? I've got achievements to unlock.
Yeah. So I think for that, like my sense really is, again, it's not just do it. I think a lot of times what holds people back from actually doing this is this fear, right? It could be fear of like stories you've told yourself, fear of like what will person A, B, C say, fear of what Seema and I were talking about, this guilt and disappointing somebody in your head, right? Every time when you want to do something, I guess we all have this negative voice in our head. It manifests to be, for some people it's actually their parents, for some it's some random aunt, for some it's like a mentor advisor. So I genuinely feel that when people say I procrastinate, and maybe I'm blessed, I don't have that problem, right? I'm someone who in fact says yes to a lot more things than I say no to.
Yeah.
And sometimes that has its own sort of issues of like taking on too much and burnout and stuff. But I think when people sort of call things I am procrastinating, or I am like creating a plan, an idea, I just think it comes from a place of fear. I actually think it's an excuse and you're essentially scared. And so instead of you just saying now's not the right time, or like, why should I embrace the cringe? Or I don't know if like, I just don't have the perfect idea. I'd say you're actually scared, and maybe spend some time exploring what are you scared about, and address that and ask yourself, what's the worst that would happen, right? And a lot of times, once we kind of explore that, we realize that whatever's the worst we've thought about is actually disconnected from reality, and it just makes it easy to do it, right? Like, what's the worst that will happen?
Yeah.
5 people will laugh. What's the worst that'll happen? No one's going to read it. No one's going to listen to my podcast. Like, so what, right? And I think it also holds back a lot of people who are South Asian, especially from like, I think, shooting their shot and asking for opportunities or raising their hand. And it happens
Yeah.
in the workplace too, right? A lot of times we're very competent, but we not go and ask for that next promotion, or we won't ask for a raise, or we won't kind of apply for a stretch job because we're scared of like, I don't measure up. And in my head, it's always been like, what's the worst that'll happen? That person
Yeah.
ignore you or say no, right?
Yeah.
Still better than you not trying, because maybe
Right.
they'll say yes.
Yeah. What about the person who starts, but that same fear shows up in a different fashion? There are 5 episodes in, they've started posting, they've started recording YouTube videos, they maybe took the first step to buy their first investment property or something outside of their traditional path, but they're in sort of that middle of where it's sort of the tough part, where it's sticky and it's boring and it's monotonous, and the excitement of starting, which got them through the fear, is starting to wane, and that fear shows up in a different fashion of like, we're not good enough. Like, yeah, you started, but you're not good
Yeah.
enough, you won't do it, other people are doing it, life is too busy, now's not the right time. I believe it's the same mechanism, just showing up in a different outfit. What do you say to that? Because you've grown a newsletter to 2,000 people, you've obviously done it quite a bit. I know that you're consistent. um, and I think we touched on the answer a bit ago, but I just want to make sure that we address it head on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think anything, I know we were talking about this also, right? Anything that's worth doing is sort of hard. And we all sort of go through that curve, right? There's anytime you start something new, there's initial excitement, then you go into that valley of lull or whatever you want to call it, when it's just hard. And then eventually, it's a hockey stick that kind of goes up. And I grew up playing tennis, right? And I remember for the first like year and a half of me like playing tennis as a nine, I think I started when I was 8 or 9. I didn't play a game. I was very frustrated. And my coach told me, look, there are like 10, 20 different movements, right? A forehand, a backhand, a smash, a volley. unless you perfect this, you're not ready to go out and play the game. And on Fridays, I remember this, when I was 10, 11, my second serve in some games, I'd done a lot of like double faults. And my coach basically said, you're going to do 2000 serves. They have to go and be the correct sort of serve. It doesn't have to be a fault.
Mhm.
And if there is a fault, we start from zero. And like for a 10, 11-year-old, my shoulder was like crying. And I just kept going on and on with that movement. And I remember like sometimes being at like 1,500 and something and doing a fault, and he's like zero. Right. And so I think I just grew up having played a sport like tennis where there's a lot of like, you just keep doing it till it becomes muscle memory. Right. And so for me, I always tell people that there was obviously that excitement of starting something new. And then if you just stay consistent, you just outcompete most people, because most people just give up. Right. If you're the person who just starts something and just does it a little longer, you already sort of beat the average, because most people give up by, to your point, episode 10. And if you're the one who's hit episode 100, there's a high likelihood that everybody who started with you, a lot of them have sort of stopped doing it. And so you're one of the only. But also through feedback loops and learning, you'll keep getting better, right? Like the only way we get better is by going in, trying, sort of failing, our brain sort of trying something different and getting better. So I'd say do that. My only one sort of call out to people always is that sometimes we kind of confuse our own ability. And so there is also this healthy balance of knowing when to quit and when to give up, which is why I think having someone external, it could be a coach, it could be a mentor, an advisor, or someone who's sort of disconnected from you, not necessarily a friend, but someone slightly removed, to give you honest feedback. And maybe it is like, hey, Dinesh, you think you're really good at this. And yes, you tried. My genuine, honest assessment is this is not your gift to share with the world, right? And then knowing, and I guess being able to take that feedback as an adult and quitting, because I think there's a thin line between just grinding it and doing something,
Yeah.
and also sort of spending your energy and doing something that you're like pathetic at, right? And so for me, it's like my mom really wanted me to like do a bunch of dance classes. Like honestly, that's one of the teachers was like, she does not have like rhythm in her body, right? Like the kid is athletic, let her play tennis, let her play soccer. And at some point I could have like done all those dance classes, but I would just never be good enough, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of also, I think, recognizing is the squeeze sort of worth the juice in the end? Do I like truly like, am I giving up early, or am I like, this needs to be abandoned pretty quickly in my life so I can do something else?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's like the book The Big Leap talks about your 4 zones, like the zone of incompetence, where you either don't know how, or you really, to your point, right? Like, I don't have the rhythm in my body, and just acknowledging that's what it is without judgment. The zone of competence, the zone of excellence, and the zone of genius, right? So if you guys haven't read that book, it's a quick read, but it's a good one. But what I wanted to ask about, because I know Dinesh said something about, okay, but how, right? And that really, I remember feeling that almost frustration, kind of just taking us full circle back to starting something new or deciding whether the juice is worth the squeeze. And I'm curious, because you said you had a coach.
Uh-huh.
So when you were in this phase of creation of this newsletter, did you have the support of an external coach then? Or was that after you had gotten some coaching? Talk to the listeners about really where you were in your own personal self-actualization journey.
Yeah. So no, the coach came after, but I started the newsletter. So I've always sort of like been active on the internet, right? I kind of used Twitter, now called X. I'd been writing on it for a few years. And so I started the newsletter and I said, you know what? I'm just going to throw this out into the world and I'll get feedback. The beauty with the internet also is when you write on the internet, like strangers cannot, like they don't really need to be kind to you, right? They very quickly give you very honest feedback. And so I said, I'm just going to develop a thick skin and I'm just going to send it. Because look, if I would send it to my mom, she'd say it's perfect, right? Like I love her and she's the one who consistently reads the newsletter. But I know she wouldn't critique it to the level I needed her to critique it. And so I wasn't relying on a writing coach or one sort of person who was an editor, which some people work with them and I think it's great. But in my case, it was just the power of the internet. I'm going to throw this out there. And no one's kind of forcing anybody to subscribe to it or read or engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if people start doing it, that's just the proof that, okay, this is working, right? And so
Yeah.
for me, it was a little bit of like, take my idea and sort of release it into the world, disconnect my ego from my creation. If people would rip into it, I would get feedback. And so it was a little bit of, I'm going to just expose myself and be vulnerable and just throw this out into the world and see what people say.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Rashi, I mean, you're such a wealth of information, and like I said, I'm so glad we had a chance to chat. I want to make sure that we give you a chance to share about sort of what you're passionate about right now and where your efforts are being placed and how you're spending your time. So before we wrap up, why don't you tell us about sort of your professional work in learning and development? Where are you the most interested in making an impact right now? And what really gets you excited?
Perfect. So I think what I am really, really passionate about right now, if you kind of think about the world of work right now, we're obviously talking a lot about the tech side of things, right? Like if you read any sort of publication or you listen to any podcast, anything to do with the future of humans and works, I think lots of really, really smart people are thinking about the technology side of the equation. And in my head, I feel like, forget even just work. When you organize humans together, technology is one part of the equation, and then it's the people. I feel like a lot of attention is being put into the technology. How do you develop more capabilities? How do you make it smarter? My focus really is on the other side of the equation, which is people, right? How do you get humans to sort of keep up? How do you ensure that we as humans continue sort of developing and we continue using technology as a tool versus kind of become a tool to the technology? And so professionally, my sort of area of interest and focus right now really is that, right? Like large scale sort of institutional capability building. What does the future of work look like? How do you make sure that, you know, I mean, the world is made up of men and women. A lot of women are sort of dropping out of the workforce at a certain point. That is the sort of broken rung. How do you make sure women, especially when they experience certain life events, like I think being a mom is one of the big ones. How do you kind of ensure that we create structures and supports at an institutional level that they don't drop off, and how do they continue not feeling like they've been forced to make a choice, but actually truly make whatever choice feels authentic and right to them. So those are things that I'm really focused on in my professional life. I've had, like I mentioned, a very sort of squiggly career.
Mhm.
And so I spent a lot of my time in growth marketing and sales, in product management. And I've looked at a lot of these people problems now through that lens. And so that's the big thing that I've been kind of evangelizing, I guess, is this idea of how do you think of like setting up internal people teams, HR teams, people functions, um, as sort of product teams, right? And how do you elevate the stature of these people? In a lot of places, unless you make money for the business, people sort of assume you are like a support function or a back office function. And I think it's really important for people who think about people topics in organizations to be sort of their stature to be elevated, and for them to also start operating more strategically. So professionally, that's like sort of my mission for the next couple of years, is how do we elevate this entire sort of profession and make it more strategic, and what are things from my experiences in other domains and functions that can be kind of infused in this. So that's sort of my big passion area right now professionally.
I love it. I love it. And that actually leads us really well into our wrap up. And at the Happy and Human podcast, we have a world famous wrap up. And the part that's such a good segue is our first question is, we live in sort of a gratification world, right?
Mhm.
From all of your experience, including the work that you just described, what is one thing that you would share with our audience that if they implement right away, they would reap the benefits and change their life in short order?
Good question. I'd say a lot of it might just be, the way, if you think of a brand, right, has a source code, like its sense of purpose or its source of being. I think a lot of times we as humans don't do the difficult work of stepping back and articulating and actually putting it on paper. What is our kind of beliefs and value systems, right? And so I think if someone's listening to this conversation, if all that they do over the weekend is just sit down and do the difficult work and say, who am I? What do I really believe in the world? And what do I stand for? I think that would really help, because it'll give you a sense of anchor, right? Beyond a certain point in life, most decisions have trade-offs, and there's no right, wrong, sort of yes, no answer. And I think in the absence of really like having something that anchors you and grounds you and knowing, who are you and what do you believe in and what are your value systems, most people feel very sort of anchorless, right? So my big thing is, we should all be like self authors, self-authorship. We should be writing the stories of our own lives, and the only way you can do that is by knowing what you stand for, what you believe in this world. So the way organizations would write a charter or a manifesto, I think each one of us as humans should have our own.
Yeah.
This is my charter, my sort of, this is who I am. So that's my one thing. Tactical piece of advice is just, it's a difficult thing to do, but create the space to just sit down and define who you are on a piece of paper.
I love it. That's so good.
Yeah. I mean, the overachiever in me would be like, okay, so I need to get it done in one sitting, one whatever. And I've learned that just opening yourself up to questions like that, you may not get the answer right away.
Yeah.
But the key is to ask the question, because otherwise you'll never get the answer if you don't ask the question, right?
Exactly.
So you may get a lot of answers that first time you sit down, but it's iterative, and that manifesto develops as you do, right? It's a reflection.
It's an evolving document that you could say every year or every birthday I revisit and I say, do I still stand by this?
Yeah. I love, because it's a manifesto, not a doctrine.
Yes.
Which is key distinction there. Okay. So now I get to have a lot of fun with this next question. Listeners, if you are tuning in for the first time, first of all, thank you for tuning in. We're so excited and happy that you're here. But this part is called Ask It Forward, which means that the guest before you, Rashi, has asked a question of you, not knowing, when we would be recording, what we'd be talking about, who we would be speaking with, just asked a question that came through them. And so you get to answer that question. Listeners, she doesn't know what the question is yet. And then you get to ask a question forward of the next guest. Sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. So this question is from Parag Maliwar, who is based in the US and does a lot of work around inclusion and all sorts of cool things. But he asks, you saw that movie, the Forrest Gump movie, right? So going back to that, is life a box of chocolates where, anything is possible and you can kind of pick? Or do we all have a clear destiny? Is it predetermined, or is it up to chance or possibility? What do you think?
Well, again, great question. My belief is that life is a box of chocolate. And I think we sort of are constantly writing the story of our life as it's sort of being, it's a work in progress. It's being written. And the only way to know the story of anybody's life is sort of looking at it in retrospect, right? Like, it's the day when your life will end is when people would say, this was the story of your life. And I think, to me, I believe in it because I think that gives me a lot of agency to just do things and make changes, right? I think it just means that there is no set destiny. There is no set goal. I can keep changing my life today, tomorrow. I can just, there's this internet thing of like, you can just do things. And then so I really believe in it, right? Life is a box of chocolate. You keep picking your adventure. You just do things. We all take meandering paths. And sometimes if you take the wrong path, you just kind of backtrack and go on a different route, right? It's like this constant sort of adventure that we're all living on. And I think that's what makes it fun.
Amazing. That answer doesn't surprise me, given that you're such a advocate for this self-authorship concept. So I love it.
Yeah.
What is the question you'd like to ask of the next guest?
Okay, this is funny, but no, this is not the real question, but I really want to ask it, but I have a real genuine question here.
Okay, so ask both then.
So the question that I really want to ask them is, who is the greatest singer-songwriter of this generation and why is it Taylor Swift? But no, that's not the serious. That's just the Swiftie in me.
That's the Swiftie in you. Yeah, I've got a Swiftie that I live with. So,
but no, the genuine serious question is maybe what is say a mindset shift or maybe even a micro habit that this person did that helped them unlock happiness and fulfillment in their life by not completely giving away this hunger and this desire to be ambitious, right? There is almost the sense of, for the longest time, I was afraid to chase happiness because I thought that meant I would become stagnant. And that's one of my biggest fears, is to sort of just like be. So I'd really like to know a micro habit or just something small, mindset shift that helps you sort of navigate this dichotomy or this dual sort of pull of, I can either be happy or I can either be, ambitious and do good things in the world and good things with my life. And maybe something that they did that, we could all sort of try in our own lives.
Yeah, love it.
So good. But I have to ask, why is Taylor Swift so loved by the women of her generation?
Oh my God, that's like another. We'll probably need an hour to unpack that, because that's maybe for a separate day. I just think, I mean, she and I almost are the same age, and I think for a lot of women, she sort of normalized the experience of girlhood and sure, certain type of privileged girlhood. But I think s- all her songs are written very much from like a female point of view.
Yeah.
And I think that just shocks a lot of people, because a lot of emotions she goes through is like a lot of women feel that, right? We've gone through it. It's written again from a very, very female sort of view. And then I just think in the last couple of years, just her standing up for herself, for what she believes in, for her to both say, hey, as a woman, I want to be loved and cared for, and I actually want to be hugged by a man, but I'm still extremely strong and powerful. I think is just this dichotomy that just blows people's mind. It's like,
Yeah.
women especially, I think we're forced to fit into a box,
Right.
and to say I'm ambitious but I also want to be a mom. I mean, she talks about songs about wanting to have babies and wanting to be loved by a guy, but also talks about how she can burn the world down when she's angry, and normalizes some of these emotions like rage. And you should be scared of me. I think a lot of women just feel seen.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she gets a lot of hate also, because she's just not being defined and put into this very neat box. And
Yeah.
there's a lot about her life, which is, I think, very interesting. And there's a lot about that I feel, right? Because I also feel like there's a part of me which really wants to be this mom to my child. And there's a part of me which really wants to be, a senior executive at a billion-dollar company. And a lot of people find that very confusing. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, there are a lot of Taylor songs that help me process all this confusion sometimes. So it's maybe
Yeah.
that's it.
She's great at a yes and approach, which is what I personally love about her. It's not, you can have all the boxes. You can have all the boxes, and she's just brilliant in my mind. So
Right. Yeah, totally agree. All right. We don't have a good way to show our thanks other than saying thank you. So at the Happy and Human podcast, we give our guests an opportunity to share an organization that they're near and dear to, so that we can make a contribution on behalf of the show to say thanks, and also raise awareness of different organizations and causes that our listeners or ourselves might not have heard of. So, Rashi, do you have an organization that we can make a contribution to?
Yes, it may not be one sort of big organization, but something that I sort of do is just find like a local women's shelter. I think a lot of times women who've experienced just a lot of abuse, trauma, or even like single moms taking care of kids, it's just so hard that I think for me there are obviously sort of big organizations that we as a family support things like sick kids, etc. But the other thing that I've started doing is just go to like a local sort of women's shelter and go just ask them what they need, right? And sometimes it could be just donation, but a lot of times, even for people, it's like extra diapers, formula, etc., makes such a difference.
Mhm.
That to me, that's a big thing that I really really deeply care about. Is these issues around women and children, and especially in today's day and age where sort of women's rights are some of them are being chipped away. A lot of women trying to do it by themselves alone, with their own sort of grief and trauma, I think is just something I would really appreciate if you or anybody who's interested in just go support, just find like a local sort of women's shelter close by and
Yeah.
go and ask them what they need, and then just help them out with it.
Absolutely.
so good. I love that you said that there's many causes, and so that's something that I think we all, again, tend to fall into, trying to put something in a box. What is it that I care about? Well, it can be many things, and it can look like different. The ways to support and contribute can look different depending on the times and the needs of the organization, and
Mhm.
where you personally are at as the one who expresses that act of giving. I recently heard something for the first time, and I've heard similar sentiments before, but it was so beautiful. I can't stop thinking about it. So I just wanted to share it with you, given that we're talking about, moving the needle forward. And it said, you ache when you take, but you live when you give.
I love that.
And I thought that was really, felt like a nice, soft wrap for my heart. So, okay, Rashi. So we know you're based in Toronto,
Oh.
but, obviously you're on this great big thing called the internet, and you've given us so much insight. where can our listeners connect with you?
Sure. So I am available by my first name, last name, on all text-based social media sites. So LinkedIn, X, Twitter, now called X, Threads, Blue Sky, Substack, which is where I write my newsletter. You can just find me. If you just go Rashi Kakkar, you'll be able to find me. And the newsletter, yeah, I'll share the link with you all, but it's called Dex and Diapers. Again, if you Google it or go on Substack and find it, it's pretty easy. Like, just go put in your email ID, and every other Saturday you'll start getting it in your inbox.
Amazing.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for sharing Dex and Diapers with us, as well as your lovely energy. We're so excited. And Dinesh, thank you for, you were really the one to reach out to Rashi. And so thank you for bridging and facilitating our connection.
Glad you could make it, Rashi.